An interesting topic of public debate at the moment is the difficulties of the Western democracies. We look at the United States, we look at the European Union, we see democratic societies that are having enormous difficulty in resolving important questions that really can't be put off. So the obvious thing is fiscal problems, the problems of public debt. These are countries or groups of countries that share problems of rising debt, of insuperable disagreements about who should bear the cost of adjustment, and as a result, nothing is done. But it's not only fiscal gridlock. There's also problems of migration and immigration, problems of the environment. These are all issues where it's extremely difficult, as it seems, for democratic societies to come together and make effective decisions that will resolve problems that really can't be put off indefinitely. And because of this, a lot of people start to think more kindly about authoritarian models of government, such as in China. A well-known British journalist said, "Let's hear it for the Chinese Communist Party, at least they can build railway lines." This is a very important and necessary public debate, but I often think that it's carried out on the basis of asymmetric evidence. The evidence that we have is asymmetric because the problems of democracies are all out in the open. The nature of democracies are that their processes are transparent. What happens in parliaments and so on is reported in the papers. So we can see that democracies have these zones where nothing can be decided. When we look at authoritarian regimes, we don't see how they make decisions, because a common feature of all authoritarian regimes is that decision-making is secret. And it's secret for very clear reasons. Firstly, because secret decision-making is then not accountable. Secondly, if you make decisions in secret, nobody can lobby you and try to influence you. Thirdly, secrecy is, I think, a very valuable feature of the regime of a dictator, because it creates an automatic loyalty test. If you want to know if your subordinate, a colleague, is loyal, you share secret information with them and you watch what they do with it. So, suppose, for example, I say to you, here's a government secret, 2 + 2 = 5. Don't tell anybody. And then a few weeks later, I hear back from somebody else, oh, did you know that 2 + 2 = 5? I'll know something about you, which is that you've behaved disloyally with my secret. Authoritarian regimes have this quality of secrecy, which means that we don't know how they make decisions. And we can only really find out when regime change takes place, when the system collapses and we can go into the system as historians, look in the archives and study how secrecy worked. And this is something that we can now do with the former Soviet archives. We can look at them, we see that they're full of documents stamped secret and top secret, but it's not only that, there was a system of secrecy, and we can see how it worked. And we can see a couple of things. One is that secrecy changed the behavior of people in the system. So, for example, you violate secrecy, you're punished. That's frightening. And so we can look at Soviet government at moments when secrecy was pushed up. One of the things I've done is look at 1949. So 1947, Stalin, quite by surprise, ordered a round of tightening up of secrecy. And this gradually filtered through the state. And in 1949, it hit the Gulag. And we see this very interesting moment when suddenly, under new instructions, camp commandants were writing to Moscow saying, we can't do business. Now, what was the business of a labor camp? It was to receive materials and supplies and to supply output. A Gulag camp was a business like any other. It had to receive supplies and to supply output to others. And the problem that these camp commandants had was, we can't do business without revealing a state secret, namely that we exist. Right? And there's this moment when the whole Gulag economy seems to be at risk of melting down. And then we see how people found their ways around this because they couldn't allow it to melt down. But we also see that this problem became a problem for superiors as well as for people down at the bottom. And we watch how they dealt with it. And they dealt with it by doing nothing. They dealt with it by putting off a solution. They went through endless committee meetings. Should we try this? Should we try that? Lots of different solutions were discussed and presented. Nothing was done. So what we can see is that they were frightened to do anything, and that procrastination and delay were one of the consequences of this round of tightening up on secrecy. So as well as behavioral changes, we can also look at procedures. And anyone who's worked in the Soviet archives will possibly have become aware that these archives contain an awful lot of documentation which is extremely boring. Nobody in their right minds would want to spend any time reading it. Essentially, there are lots of pieces of paper that count other pieces of paper. A lot of them are called acts of receipt and transfer of documentation, akt uniszczenia dokumentacji, destruction of documentation. There's a huge quantity of journali wchodziłych i wychodziłych dokumentacji. What these are the evidence of a system of accounting for secret paperwork. One of the features of this system of secrecy was that the existence of secrets was also secret, and so this documentation too is all secret. Right? And the system was secret. The system of accounting for secrets was itself a government secret. Well, we can see it now. And one interesting question is, how much time do people spend servicing this system? Well, it's a very crude measure, but you can count. It's not always easy to count, but one of the things I've done is working with a microfilm archive, which is in the Hoover Institution in California. So they bought an archive on microfilm from Lithuania. This is the Lithuanian Special Archive of the Lithuania KGB. And the unique feature of this archive is it has an excellent electronic catalogue that lists documents file by file. And so it's a big archive, there's 1 million pages in it, and you can count, file by file, roughly 1/3 of this archive is documentation that counts other documents. Well, you can think to yourself, does that mean that 1/3 of KGB time was spent protecting its own secrets? What about other parts of the Soviet economy? Because the system that the KGB operated, it also enforced on every enterprise, every ministry, the State Bank, the Lithuanian Gosplan. The KGB inspected them all to verify the regime of secrecy. Did they too spend 1/3 of their time counting their own paperwork? We don't know. I'm speculating. We don't have evidence on this. But it's a question, and one that I think historians ought to try to answer. So the summary that I would like to give to you is that we see the problems of democracies in the present day. We don't see the problems of authoritarian regimes and the costs they have to incur in order to preserve their lack of accountability because it's secret. We can only learn this from historical records. But when we look at historical records, we see that actually it was potentially hugely expensive. An enormous amount of skilled and qualified bureaucratic time was spent doing nothing but keeping paperwork away from the public. If you look at China today, China has a new problem, the problem of the post-paper age. China has a world of the internet. We know that China has hundreds of thousands of people employed in censoring China's internet. It spends billions of dollars on software applications, enabling it to control microblogging and this sort of thing. So these are the present-day analogues of the kind of things that the Soviet Union had to do in the age of paper, when you couldn't have access even to a photocopier without that precious DOS tool.